Up next, we will talk about the apocalypse, the four horsemen. Are they coming? Stand by with Brother Michael Dimond next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. I'm George Norrie with our guest this hour, Brother Michael Dimond. Of course, he's been on the program before. He is the producer of a number of video documentaries on what he calls the post-Vatican counterfeit Catholic Church, end-time prophecy, and other subjects as well. We're going to talk with Brother Dimond this hour and take your calls later on about the apocalypse. I'm beginning to read so many stories about the four horsemen, what they mean, and how close we're coming to all this. I thought I'd bring Brother Dimond on to maybe help us and explain this to us. Michael, how are you?
Okay.
Good to have you with us. Always a pleasure, my friend. So the four horsemen of the apocalypse, which, is in the book of Revelation, and they talk about, wars and famines, things that seem to be happening right now. Should we be concerned?
I think so, because if you look at the fact in Apocalypse chapter 12, verse 1, it speaks specifically about a woman clothed with the sun, which our information proves is the apparition of Our Lady of Fatima that happened in 1917. And in fact, the newspaper, the day following the final apparition of Our Lady, where she performed a miracle in which the sun spun in front of about 100,000 people, the newspaper the following day described it as the sign of heaven. And that's exactly what Apocalypse 12, verse 1 speaks about. It says, I saw a woman clothed with the sun, and right before that it says, behold the sign of heaven. So it's talking about the event of Fatima. So that was really the start of this apocalyptic age that we're living in. And as we speak about, the other things that are specifically spoken about are a great apostasy, an abomination of desolation being set up in the holy place our Lord mentions in Matthew 24:15, which we believe is the Novus Ordo Mass, the new order of Mass that was established by Paul VI on April 3rd, 1969, and the fall of the city of Rome in the last days, which is specifically predicted at the apparitions of Our Lady of La Salette, France, on September 19th, 1846. She said, Rome will lose the faith and become the seat of the Antichrist. The church will be in eclipse, so seemingly blocked out. And also the predictions in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4, St. Paul sees the Antichrist sitting in the temple of God. He says, the son of perdition sitteth in the temple of God. And so Catholic biblical scholars have said for a long, long time that the temple of God most probably represents St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. And so that's what we see as happening right now as the falling away from the faith, the great apostasy predicted as happening and has happened over the last 50 years. And we're at the tail end of it now. And the other information that we get into on the Antichrist, which we actually believe was John Paul II, who preached that every man was God. He sat in the temple of God. And what is specifically predicted is that there will arise 7 heads over a new kingdom of Rome, a new Vatican city-state. That's really what's being predicted in the apocalypse as a beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. And Daniel in the Old Testament speaks about the Roman Empire and the land that it makes up as the 10 horns. And so in the book of Revelation, St. John talks about the 10 horns as the land of Europe, and he sees this new city-state with 7 heads. And so we believe that they are actually these 7 heads, the last 7 claimants to the papacy. And so this new city-state was actually created with the Vatican. The Lateran Treaty in 1929 created the Vatican city-state, which was a new kingdom in which the popes now had temporal authority. They did have it under the papal states like in the 1800s, but then they lost that temporal authority, but they regained it with the establishment of the Vatican city-state.
Well, Michael, why do they talk, though, in parables, these writings? When they talk about these 4 heads and think, why don't they just come right out and spell it out for us?
Because it's a mystery that the people who investigate these things and really want to search out the answers to these questions, God will give the insight. and will give them the answers to understand at least some of what's going on. You are not necessarily going to know everything, but you're going to have a pretty good idea of what's about to happen. And so that's what it specifically speaks about, these seven heads. And our information points out how this is connected to the European Empire, the EU that was created. And what's interesting is about the apparitions at Fatima, the woman clothed with the sun, Apocalypse 12, verse 1, Apocalypse 12, verse 3. Then you see a great red dragon, which is communism. And then in Apocalypse 13, verse 1, another beast arises out of the sea, having the 7 heads and 10 horns. And this is actually the revived Roman Empire. It's Europe, the EU, being established in the last days. And so that's actually part of all of this, too.
Now, these 4 horsemen and these 4 horses, they talk about riding out on a white, red, black, and pale horse, symbolizing, and I want to see if you agree with this, pestilence, war, famine, and death. Would you agree with that?
Well, what I would say is that the most interesting thing for us is seeing the European Empire arising, and that being what Daniel predicts in the last days, because he specifically speaks about the 10 horns, and that's the Roman Empire. And so the European Union of the last days is Rome revived. And so that is one of the most interesting things. And what is also interesting is that Europa in Greek mythology is a woman riding on a beast. And in the Apocalypse chapter 17, verse 3, St. John says, I saw a woman sitting upon a scarlet beast. And so that's actually what Europe means, and so that's what he's describing. And St. John was speaking from Europe. He was speaking to the churches of Europe, and so he was concerned with what would happen in Europe.
Well, these signs that point to this, can they be stopped? Can they be altered, or not?
Well, it can't ultimately be stopped because the end has to come. But one interesting point about this is that the EU actually uses a woman riding on a beast. They use it many times in their on their stamp, for example. They have a woman riding on a beast on the official stamp. They have a sculpture outside the EU Parliament building in Brussels, Belgium, and they actually have a woman riding on a beast. And the official stamp of the second election of the European Parliament of the EU actually has, incredibly, a woman riding on a beast with 7 hills. And so St. John also sees these 7 hills, which are actually Rome, because Rome is the city of 7 hills. And so that's where all of this is really happening in the last days. And so what's predicted is that these 7 heads, St. John says, I saw one of the 7 heads receive a death's wound, and the death wound was healed, and the whole world worshiped the beast. We believe that was the shooting of John Paul II, May 13th, 1981. He recovers from that critical wound. In fact, Ali Akka, the Turkish assassin that shot John Paul II at point-blank range, 3 times said to him when he finally met him after he recovered from this really critical injury, it should have been, he said, how did you survive my shot? Because he was a professional assassin. He couldn't believe it. And so we believe that the recovery of that is the Antichrist recovering. And so he recovers the whole world. John Paul II, we love you. And now Benedict XVI, who we believe is the false prophet, is planning to, quote, canonize John Paul II in the next maybe year or two, which we believe is the final sign of the end. We believe he's the false prophet. In fact, it mentions that the second beast, in Apocalypse 13, verse 11, it says he comes up out of the earth and he exercises all the power of the former beast in his sight, and that he makes an image of the beast who receives the deadly wound and causes all to worship the first beast who receives the deadly wound and was healed. And so that, we believe, is the, quote, canonization of John Paul II that will occur probably in the next year or two. It also mentions that he will bring down fire in the sight of men. And I don't know if you remember this in the news, but it was on the 2-year anniversary, I believe, of John Paul II's death, right in Krakow, Poland, where John Paul II comes from. There was a huge bonfire. Someone took a picture of it, and John Paul II appeared in the flames.
I saw that picture. Stay with us, Michael. Going to come back. We're going to take some calls with you as we talk about the apocalypse on Coast to Coast AM. Well, the Coast Insiders Club tonight had its first video-audio chat. We had some fun, learned a few things. I'll make some adjustments when we do it again in September. We'll come back in a moment more with Brother Michael Dimond, his website, mostholyfamilymonastery.com. Back in a moment. And we're talking about the apocalypse this hour with Brother Michael Dimond. We'll take your calls as well. Michael, of course, there will be some diehard Catholics who don't like the fact that you've called the Pope the false prophet. What are you going to say to them?
Well, they really have to study what he's preaching because he endorses every religion under the sun. Like at his Assisi prayer meeting on last October 27, 2011, he invited the leaders of all the different false religions throughout the world to Assisi to, quote, pray for peace. This included the head of spirit worshippers from Africa, the Hindu leader, the Buddhist leader, the rabbi. He even invited agnostics, and he gave them all a forum to promote their false beliefs. And so this is actually condemned as apostasy in Catholic teachings throughout the ages. So, we really get more in depth into this on the website VaticanCatholic.com, and people can call us 24 hours a day too. So,
but you think the clock is ticking for the apocalypse?
Yeah, we believe this guy, Benedict XVI, who, by the way, his name in Greek, Benedictos, equals 666.
Oh, come on, really?
No, that's a fact. And it says about the second beast that comes up out of the earth, who exercise all the power and authority in the sight of the first beast who receives the deadly wound. It says his name equals 666.
That's weird.
And John Paul II, of course, appointed Joseph Ratzinger, now Benedict XVI, as the head for the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith in the 1980s. And so he exercised all the power and authority in the sight of John Paul II. So this guy is the final anti-pope. And so we're really dealing in a terrible apostasy, and we're at the tail end of it, and time is running out. You can see that by all the other signs that are occurring with Fukushima, to the world economy is collapsing, to World War III ready to break out in the Middle East.
And famine now, and famine with this drought.
Yeah.
You add that in. Let's take some calls here, Michael. Let's go to Teresa in Phoenix, Arizona, west of the Rockies, first of all. Hi, Teresa.
Hi, how you guys doing?
Good, thanks.
Hi.
Oh, brother, you are a liar. Let me tell you, Pope John Paul II is a saint, and so is Pope Benedict the 16th.
Boy.
You are part of the apostasy, sir.
No,
and
actually,
everybody listening,
well, hold on,
please,
Michael, let her
we're
talk.
listening to you. Give me my moment. Everybody listening needs to pray for this man's soul because he is spreading lies. He is part of the infiltration of deception, the diabolical disorientation that was mentioned at Fatima. Pope John Paul II was saved by Our Lady of Fatima, and he attributed it to her, and everybody with any sense knows that, and you are a liar.
There you go, Michael.
You obviously know nothing about John Paul II. I've read more of John Paul II than just about anyone in the whole world. I've read every single Vatican newspaper that's ever been published in the English language. And if you know anything about Catholic teaching, which by your answers you demonstrate you know nothing about, you would know that this guy endorses every religion. You don't have any problem with that? He invited the head high priest of voodoo worshippers of Benin, Africa, to his Assisi January 24, 2002 meeting. He has bowed and kissed the Koran May 14th, 1999. He said, "May St. John the Baptist protect Islam," when he was in Jordan, March 21st, 2000. He says we shouldn't convert non-Catholics to the Catholic faith. He signed agreements on that. So you obviously don't have any problem with that. But we actually get into a lot of these things. We have this package of 3 different books and a DVD with 4 different programs, and people can get this because it covers all these things on John Paul II, on Benedict XVI, on how prophecy is being fulfilled, on Fatima, on the apocalypse, how the world is about to end. and what the church really teaches about all these issues. And we have an 800 number they can call anytime. It's a critical $10 package. It's 800-513-0029. That's 800-513-0029. I'll give it one last time. 800-513-0029. And that, if people aren't convinced by that information, that's really the best introductory package I could offer someone to try to convince them, hopefully, of what's going on.
Michael, what is your reaction to people who claim that the rapture has been imminent? There was a fellow who missed it twice, several times, actually. But there are those out there that say the rapture is near. Your reaction to that?
I would say that that is not mentioned, that the only thing that happens is when Christ returns, that those who are alive are caught up with Christ to be with him. That's when he returns. It's at when he's actually coming back at the end of the world to judge the living and the dead. It's not this idea of, years before Christ returns, there are going to be so many people that will be taken out of the tribulation. That's actually false.
Let's go to Jeff in Ferguson, Missouri, east of the Rockies. Hey, Jeff, go ahead.
Good morning, George. Good morning, Brother Michael.
Hi.
One quick thing, George. Did you like the picture I sent you?
You sent me a great picture of Curiosity with a animated Martian looking back at us.
Actually, TARDIS.
Yeah.
But anyway, my question is about the identity of the Antichrist. What are the possibilities he's of extraterrestrial origin that possesses a world leader?
Extraterrestrial, Michael.
Well, as I said on the previous program with you, George, the UFOs are demonic. It's demonic activity, and that's just what it is. It's so there are no ETs, and there is no such thing as an ET.
And there are a lot that believe they are demonic, by the way. So you're not standing alone on that one.
The very fact of the features that we see, them appearing and disappearing, penetrating the ground, the water changing size, shape, color, these are all things that could not be from any material civilization. And the very fact that if they've been around so long and they have the technology that people think they have, they would have either taken us over or destroyed us or made first contact. And there's no evidence whatsoever of that.
If I have read Revelation correctly, Michael, and interpreted correctly, after the apocalypse begins and we hit this roller coaster of life, eventually things get better for us.
Well, I guess what we're saying is that this is basically, we're on the very brink of the end of the world and the second coming of Jesus Christ. And though we don't know the day or the hour, the time is at the doors. And so we're really right at the brink of it. And as far as I can see, the only sign that I think, and this is just an opinion, is that, quote, canonization of John Paul II by Benedict XVI the next year or two, and maybe World War III breaking out, and that basically will be the end. It will all be over, because if what I'm saying is correct, which I believe it is, obviously.
Which you don't hope is correct, right? I'm sure you don't want the apocalypse to occur.
Well, it has to be. There's no way that you can explain the current situation of what has happened to the Catholic Church, real Catholicism, outside of the fact that it was predicted in biblical prophecy and Marian prophecy.
How many traditionals?
Explain it. I mean, because otherwise, if people believe that this is really what the Church has always taught, which we prove that what these last five claimants, that's who we say are anti-popes, the last from John the 23rd to Benedict XVI, that what they've been teaching and also Vatican II taught, is totally contradicted by what the popes have defined on faith and morals in councils, in their magisterial authority, teaching the Church. And so they're two different religions. And so there's no other way to explain what's going on now and what they're teaching in the name of Catholicism outside of the very fact that the crisis was predicted to happen. It has happened. That as our Lord allowed his own body to be placed in the hands of his enemies, he has allowed the buildings of the Catholic Church to be usurped by his enemies in the last days as the supreme punishment for the sins of the world, as the punishment for the sins of the world.
When you talk with somebody outside your forum and they don't agree with you, does it end up in a shouting match, or do people and yourself carry on a discussion?
It all depends. I mean, the way I feel is if they are not convinced by the very fact that these guys are endorsing every religion that's false and they don't see a problem with it, then there's nothing really almost you can do with them. And so they also, by that very fact, that's why the current so-called Catholic Church, they accept pro-abortion politicians. They accept that's a fact, because when that whole crisis happened with John Kerry when he was running for president years ago, the United States Conference of so-called Catholic Bishops said that each bishop can decide whether they want to give pro-abortion politicians communion or not. Mm-hmm. And Benedict XVI, when he was working as Joseph Ratzinger under John Paul II, said that the policy of the United States Conference of so-called Catholic Bishops is very much in line with the way the Vatican sees this issue. So what that means is that you can be pro-abortion in the counterfeit so-called Catholic Church and still be, quote, Catholic. Not in the real Catholic Church, though. And so that's a fact, that they believe you can believe anything and you can still be a Catholic. The only ones that they may not think are Catholics are people like myself, probably.
How many traditionalists like you are out there?
I don't know. I mean, it's.
I mean, a lot or a few?
Well, I think it's growing. I mean, obviously, it's not as big as the Vatican, and the numbers are, not going to be gigantic. Our Lord actually says when he returns, it will be as in the days of Noah, so it shall also be when the Son of Man returns.
Next up, let's go to first-time caller James out there in California. Hi, James. Go ahead.
Hey, thank you for the program and the opportunity.
Sure thing.
Hi there, Brother Dimond. I'm quite curious there because you give the purview of looking at this harlot who rides on the back of a seven-headed beast, correct? That would be like looking from the shores of America to another country? Is that what you're indicating in what you said?
We're saying that that's what St. John sees.
Oh, well, the problem with it is in St. John, he sees the whore of Babylon, and she sits on a 10-headed beast. And the way you see that is when you turn around and look at America, because the one that's standing in the waters is called Trivium. And I do know this. I do have quite a good professional background. I am an engineer, we do aerial flight photography, and we have been photographing this for a project. So when we hear that it's always the purview from us looking at the shore across, how come we don't return this look? Because we have to turn around and look at both sides. There's always two sides to a coin.
Any reaction there, Michael?
Well, I mean, it's, he predicts the woman riding on a beast, and that's what actually in Greek mythology is Europa. And that's what you see in the stamp. You see it outside the Parliament building. So to me, it's clearly identifying Europe, and the seven-hilled city is clearly identifying Rome. And that's why the bishop, the Pope of Rome, of the Catholic Church, has always been known as the Bishop of Rome. But one thing I was going to say, George, about you were asking about are the numbers growing. Actually, our YouTube channel, for example, has more total video views than even the Vatican's channel, in all the languages combined. So the information is growing. If people want the truth, this is the truth.
Well, that's your interpretation of the truth, right? Because I wanted to ask you that when you say they're false religions, they all believe in God, don't they?
They all claim to believe in God, but if you don't believe in the real God, in Jesus Christ, then you don't believe in the true God. And the fact that you may profess to believe in the true God won't help you in the end, unfortunately. So,
Rob is in Kansas City, east of the Rockies. Hi, Rob, your turn.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
How y'all doing tonight? And Brother Dimond, it's a pleasure to be able to talk to you. I've seen quite a few of your videos on YouTube. And,
great, thanks.
I agree with quite a bit of what you say. I studied Fatima, and I realized that, the church never did do exactly the way the Virgin requested in Fatima. That's a big telltale thing right there. But my question was, with the apostasy in the church the way it is there any authentic Catholic priest that have the apostolic, as of now, that has the apostolic power to for the sacraments of the church. When, like, if you're going to church, how do you know whether or not you're attending a church that it has an apostate priest that is
validly ordained?
Yeah, that's solidly ordained in order to be able to.
Yeah. Well, as long as the bishop who ordained the person, used the traditional rite of ordination, then that person would have been validly ordained. And that's one of the other things, that under the reign of Paul VI on June 18th, 1968, he changed the entire rite of ordination for the priesthood. And in fact, he actually borrowed almost identically the changes that the Anglican Protestants made after King Henry VIII. They changed the whole rite of ordination, and they ripped out of the rite of ordination specific prayers like receive the power to offer sacrifice, to bless, to lead, to preach, to offer sacrifice. These things were all deleted by Paul VI, as the Anglicans also deleted those things. And Pope Leo XIII, who was a pope in the late 1800s, he said that the Anglican rite of ordination, that they don't have any valid priest, because in their whole rite of ordination there's no mention of the sacrifice, of offering sacrifice. All these things have been removed, deleted, and struck out. And so they also changed the rite of confirmation, extreme unction. Of course, they changed the Mass on April 3rd, 1969. They turned the priests around to face the people. They gave communion in the hand. They changed the Mass from Latin to English. The whole thing became a Protestant service, essentially, a counterfeit, quote, Catholic Mass. And that's exactly also what the Church of England did, changing the Mass from Latin to English, turning the priests around to face the people, communion in the hand. And so what you have happening is a revolution seemingly happening inside the Catholic Church for those who are not aware of what was going on. And so that's why people couldn't put their finger on necessarily right at the beginning what exactly was happening once all the changes started to happen, especially in the 1970s, to the Mass and to the Eucharist. And then, of course, they changed the words of Jesus Christ that he used in the upper room in Matthew 26:28, where he uses specifically the word many. They changed that word to the word all, which the Church has always said, if you change the words that Jesus Christ specifically instituted for any sacrament of the Church, and the new word doesn't mean the same thing as the old word, the sacrament's invalidated. And, of course, that actually is the fulfillment of what Daniel predicts as the sacrifice ceasing. And so the sacrifice ceases by the fact they change the words of consecration, and he says, Daniel, at the same time, the abomination of desolation will be seen in the holy place. And that was the establishment of the Novus Ordo Missae, the new order of Mass, that second table or altar that was placed upon and over against the true altar of God, which, by the way, is very interesting because Daniel predicts an abomination of desolation that will occur and did occur in the books of the Maccabees, where the same exact thing happened. A second altar table was placed upon and over against the true altar of God in substitution for the true sacrifice. 1 Maccabees 1:57, 1 Maccabees 1 verse 62.
Michael, we are going to watch this clock that we talk about here with the apocalypse, which you claim is ticking away. The four horsemen, pestilence, war, famine, death, we'll all watch for it.